If I had to pick some stories that would top off Throwback Thursday, two would be it. Three would be it. Not standing for the suspended for not standing during the Pledge of Allegiance, number one. Second would be the Fourth Amendment in our schools. And thirdly, students and constitutional rights. No one even knows about the Fourth Amendment, but as we showed you, schools can enact the Fourth Amendment right because of all this. As we explained from Hip Hughes' history, you have rights, but this ain't Ticker versus Iowa. And it's all explained.
The future of your business
I've
is
shown
here.
this several
With
times,
Wix,
but what I'm
you
going to
get
do is
advanced AI kit.
play a portion of when he talked about the Fourth Amendment.
Yo, you can't search me. You ain't got no warrant. Fourth Amendment, baby. Psych. Not in school, you don't. This is New Jersey versus TLO 1985. And basically, these two girls, they're doing a little bit of a smoking in the bathroom. They come out, someone smells it. The vice principal's like, empty your bag. They're like, we're not going to empty my bag. The vice principal's like, I'm going to empty your bag. And bada boom, you have drug paraphernalia. You're out of here. And now she's going to the court saying he didn't have a right to search my bag. He had no probable cause. He didn't go for a warrant. He just on a whim decided he was going to do this. So it's an illegal search. Therefore, you can't use that in a court of law. Mapp versus Ohio. Needless to say, the court says, sister, you better sit down because you're in big trouble. And what they come down to is basically saying the school has a safety purpose. They have to have the ability, if there's reasonable suspicion, to be able to search a student's purse. What if there's a gun in there? What if there's something dangerous in there? We can't have this kind of probable cause warrant court thing going on. You have an expectation of privacy, but not an expectation beyond a reasonable suspicion. Who's the reasonable suspicion decider? So I guess that would be, the person in authority. So why don't you empty your pockets? Be careful what you do, kids, because you don't get probable cause.
And if you were to hear from a lawyer, Law by Mike is one of the biggest YouTubers ever with a bunch of hits. From these two videos that we talked about. Watch.
Who's allowed to go through your stuff?
I'm gonna need to see what's inside your backpack.
What? Why?
Because I think you stole test answers from my desk.
Why would you think that?
Because there's no way you scored that high without them. Now hand over the backpack.
Wait, you can't do that. Right, Mike?
He's right. Teachers don't have a right to randomly search it.
Ha! What about a strong hunch? Nope. Reasonable suspicion is more like another student informing you that a student is carrying weapons or contraband. And the search would turn up evidence.
You know what? I got nothing to hide. Go ahead. Search my backpack.
Now I know you're messing with me. It's not in your backpack. The answers must be in your pants. I'm giving you a strip search.
No, I'm just a boy. Mike, help.
You definitely can't do that. The second thing is that the search cannot be intrusive. How do you define intrusive? By the student's age and gender, the gender of the teacher doing the search, and the rule or law you suspect is being broken.
Yeah, you can't jump down my pants with test answers.
But he could maybe if he thought you had a weapon.
Fair enough.
Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you scored so high because you've been hanging out with Mike so much. Exactly.
Are teachers allowed to go through your stuff?
I'm gonna need to see...
That's for teachers. But can cops search you at school?
Can cops search you at school? Hey, Teach, we're looking for the kid that spray painted my car. Oh, I bet it was him.
What the?
I want to have a few words with you, kid.
Me? Teacher, can you?
Don't look at me, I'm grading papers.
Mike?
Number one, if a cop approaches you at school, don't run or resist, but you can tell them that you choose to remain silent until your lawyer is present.
Yeah, I invoke the fifth.
Fine. Don't want to talk? Then I'm going to search your backpack.
Mike!
Number two, you can refuse a consent to a search.
I do not consent.
But that doesn't mean it will stop the search.
What?
But it could protect your rights later if this ends up in court and the search was improper. No spray paint, but I do have your phone. And number 3, do not consent to a search of your phone. The cops need a warrant if they want to access what's on it.
Yeah, you already searched my bag without my consent. You better watch yourself, copper.
Darn, guess this is a dead end. Sorry to waste your time, Teach. No problem, officer. What is that? You'll never catch me alive!
Plus rocks.
Can cops search you at school? Hey, Teach.
It's the Fourth Amendment. But now one of my favorites. Now going towards school, which is one of my favorites. One of my favorites is just basically all about the drug test.
Schools make you take a random drug test? All right, class, random drug test time. Everyone take a cup.
I don't like this, teacher.
No, schools can't just randomly drug test a whole student body. They can test individuals if they have reasonable suspicion. Pee in this.
Why?
I think my suspicions are reasonable.
I'm not peeing in your cup.
You can't hold it forever.
Oh, no.
I'll wait. Nope, a teacher like that should be fired and probably put on some sort of list. You can refuse, but you may face punishments like detention, suspension, or loss of privileges. All right, team, random drug test time. Everyone take a cup.
But you need reasonable suspicion.
Not when you're in the extracurricular. We can drug test you anytime we like.
Well, we can refuse.
Sure, but then you're off the team.
I heard some states and school districts offer more protections.
Sure, check your local state laws and school district policies. But for the purposes of this video, we don't live in those areas, so either pee and play or walk away. Everything the football coach said and did in this one was actually correct, so no further explanation. Go Eagles!
Exactly.
And schools make...
Exactly. The bottom line here is if you participate in extracurricular activities, take a drug test. Maybe then you'll participate in football. You can't be on the field high and get hurt out there. Alright, you remember earlier this season we focused in on the death penalty. This Throwback Thursday is really extreme about a man who is going to die. Meet the victim's family and meet the person who's about to die. Stay with us. Over 70% of Americans say they support the death penalty. Almost every state bans the death penalty. Texas is the one that has a death penalty. As we told you last season, we introduced you to a man who knows he's about to die. His name was Antonio James in Louisiana. He was sentenced to death for killing a man. Tonight you're going to meet that man, and you'll meet the victim's family. What do they have to say about all this? And also you may remember this season we focused in on one person who was committed to die. It was a Dayland episode that I got permission to use, so I want to thank that person for allowing me to use it this season. We'll try to you on our next Throwback Thursday next season. But as we first told you in this story, everyone supports death penalty from both sides. Here's Cynthia McFadden.
.397, I'm Scoot, and in Louisiana we have got a dead man walking. We are getting ready for an execution in Louisiana just after midnight tonight. I say it's about time.
Angola Prison, 5:30 a.m. For the man scheduled to die in 18 hours, this day begins as thousands of others have. His name is Antonio James. He spent more than 12 years on death row, longer than anyone else here.
Are you afraid to die?
Well, in the past, I had feared it many years ago. But no, not in the moment.
Burning New Orleans, you're on B97.
Scoot, I think this lethal injection is much too easy. They have plenty of trees around New Orleans, and you need one good piece of rope and do like they used to do, just string them up.
7:30 a.m. Antonio James is being moved from death row to Camp F. Inmates call it the death house. If he is fearful, he does not show it. He says little, makes no requests. On death row, there are no goodbyes.
Rhonda, you're on B97.
Yes, Scoot. You know, I feel like a victim because my tax dollars are paying for his 17 years of being alive. Put him to sleep, whatever. You know, a dog bites someone, we put him to sleep.
Straight ahead.
Antonio James came to Angola Prison the first time as a teenager, then again as a young adult. He has moved into middle age here, half of his life spent behind bars. He is now 41.
Okay, just turn your face towards back against the wall.
And in the same way that he was officially processed in so many years ago, today he is processed out, fingerprinted and photographed to close his file.
You're murdering somebody, take their life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Tim, thanks for calling B97. People are very, very frustrated and they're angry.
This prison is run by Warden Burl Cain. Just after midnight tonight, he will give the signal to pump lethal poisons into James's body, unless the courts or the governor intervene.
How you doing?
Doing all right.
You ready for the next ride?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Ready to go.
For a man with a reputation for being tough, Warden Cain today finds himself struggling with some difficult questions.
If my daughter or my son were the victim, I'd want to kill them. I wouldn't even want to wait till they got here to have the death penalty. You would too. It's so complex that it's something that we can't even answer. And those people who say, oh yeah, I'm for it right now, then they need to walk in my shoes some.
I don't think nobody really want to die. But I do have hope. And I do have faith in God. It don't necessarily have to be what I want, but whatever He wants.
The ride to Camp F spans the length of the prison, 5 miles. How was the ride over?
It was all right. I got a chance to look at some of the scenes I hadn't saw for years, you know, like the cows and stuff like that, horses, and guys working in the field.
8:30. At Camp F, James is put in a holding cell, just 52 steps down the hall from the execution chamber. He has had 13 stays of execution. Last year, he came the closest. As he waited in this same cell, a judge stopped that execution just 4 hours before midnight.
Well, it's not like we haven't been here before, is it?
Got that right.
You all right?
No, all right.
When he got his stay before, I got to go tell him, Antonio, we're not going to execute you tonight. So I gave this guy the best news of his life. We're not going to kill you tonight. Okay? Good feeling.
In the years since, the warden and the condemned man have formed an unusual bond.
Would you call Antonio James a friend?
As we define friend, I wouldn't so much say friend, but a person that I care about. I care about all the inmates, but he's special. Okay.
If the execution is carried out, it will be the warden who has to give the signal to go ahead. Have you and he discussed that?
Okay, we had discussed that the first time. I think that since that time, he really got to know me as a person. And he's a religious guy as well. He believes in the same God and Christ that I do. And I believe that it would affect him more now than it would have the first time.
The two men plan tonight's dinner, James's last meal. Tradition dictates it is inmates' choice, a final indulgence. Last year's menu remains the favorite.
Fried oysters.
Yeah. We had gumbo with no chicken in it, right?
And gumbo with no chicken, that's right.
That's what seafood.
Okay, you want some fried catfish?
Yeah, if that's what you want, yeah.
Well, that's not me. You gotta have what you want, man.
Okay, we'll put it
All right. Put some fried catfish. You know, I like you a lot, but I ain't gonna trade places with you.
Is he a dangerous man, Antonio James?
Today, no. People change. We're not the same. You're not the same today as you were 15 years ago. 15 years ago, Antonio James may have been a murderer. He's not today.
Has Antonio James changed you in any way?
Yes, I came here with an opinion about a lot of things that today I don't have opinion about hardly anything. And I came strong in my convictions about, maybe even about the death penalty. And I thought, this is easy to be for it. It's not easy to be the one to do it. Good seeing you. Count 4, okay.
11:30. The warden is out of the front gate, giving the first in a long day of press briefings. He brings a message from Antonio James.
He said, well, tell them there's consequences for your behavior. He said, tell that to all the predators and all the hoodlums in New Orleans.
For Antonio James, the road to the death house began in New Orleans. He grew up poor, wandering these streets, a kid in trouble, abused, he says, by his father, and living in abandoned cars at 9. stealing food and cash by 12, 38 arrests by age 17. James says it was drugs, heroin, cocaine, whatever he could find, that led him at 24 to this street in the French Quarter. It was here, 17 years ago, that an armed robbery went bad. For the $35 in his pocket, Henry Silver was shot in the head and left to die on the sidewalk in front of his house.
People heard my uncle screaming, begging for his life. He begged for his life, and they shot him in the head.
Betty and Richard Lacoste remember the night their uncle was killed. Richard identified him at the hospital.
He was laying on a gurney with a bloody towel on the back of his head and his chest heaving up and down, and he was fighting for a life, fighting a battle for his life, which he didn't win.
James admits he was there that night, but has always maintained it was his partner, this man, who pulled the trigger.
You say you didn't have the gun, and that you were pretty upset that somebody got murdered in the course of his robbery. Why do you go out with somebody else who has a gun? 23 days later, somebody else gets murdered. Why didn't you say, I'm not doing this anymore?
But I didn't really think about it like that. Because I didn't think that it would happen again.
But it did. 3 weeks later, James was involved in yet another robbery, here at the Florida Avenue Cleaners. This time, a different partner in crime and another elderly victim, Elvin Adams, also shot in the head.
Mr. James is
The victim's son, Elvin Jr., says his father would not have resisted giving his assailants the $33 that cost him his life.
That's my fault. That's under that dirt. And the man that killed my father did it cold-bloodedly. Wasn't robbing him good enough. He had to take his life.
Have you accepted responsibility for what you've done?
Yeah, I accept responsibility, the part that I played as far as the armed robbery.
But as to the murders?
Well, no, I feel like that I'm on death row for murders that I didn't commit.
Of the 3 men involved in these crimes, only Antonio James was convicted of murder. His partners made deals with the prosecution, and in 2 separate trials, both testified that James was the gunman. In exchange, they received little or no jail time. One man served 4 years, the other walked free, while James received life in the Adams case and death for the Silver murder. James's court-appointed trial attorney now says his representation for the Silver case was so bad, Antonio James didn't get a fair trial. After a 3-day proceeding, it took a jury only 30 minutes to return with the sentence of death. And so he was sent here to Angola to die. He has waited on death row since June 7, 1983, hoping all that time for a new trial. 8 locked doors separate him from the outside world and the rest of the prison. Here the days begin one just like the one before. Friday looks like Saturday, Saturday like Sunday, week after week. Antonio James and the 57 other condemned men here have nothing to lose and nothing to do. As security risk, they spend 23 hours a day locked in their cells.
So you can touch the 2 walls virtually.
Long is not that long.
We got about a ½ an inch on each side.
Yeah.
If there's something to look forward to, it's the chance to see the sky. 3 times a week, inmates spend 1 hour outside, in separate pens they call the kennels.
In your heart of hearts, do you think that you will be executed?
Really, I don't know, but inside me, something tells me not to believe that.
Do you think it's going to happen this time?
I think so. Because, he's had a lot of appeals, and usually you can figure it, 13, 12, and 13, they run out of gas, and he's at 14. And unless the state or the court stop the train, we're going to end up in a death chamber.
And then we'll end up in that death chamber. So what does it take for a condemned man to be on death row? Coming up, you're going to hear more from Antonio James. But when we come back, you're going to meet the lawyers who are trying to get Antonio James free. Remember, he said he didn't kill, but two of the gunmen say that it was Antonio James. How could the lawyers miss that? Stay with us. Returning to our story, Antonio James is sentenced to death for a murder he says he did not commit, until one of the people on trial say that it was Antonio James that killed that person. He was sentenced to life for one murder, and he was sentenced to death for the other murder. So what does it take to kill a man? You're going to see the rehearsal that happened, and at the same time, lawyers are trying to set a man or keep him out of death row. They're trying their hardest. You're going to meet one of the lawyers and see what happens next. Once again, here's Cynthia McFadden.
In the week leading up to the scheduled execution, the prison prepares.
All right, this one counts.
2 days before Antonio James is slated to die, a special team is at the death house, practicing his final moments. A corrections officer stands in for Antonio James, and every step the condemned man will take is carefully planned, down to the last detail.
Nobody rush, just take your time.
Meanwhile, there's another team 150 miles away in New Orleans, working to save that same life.
Supreme Court denied our writ.
Turned down by a state court, attorney Nick Trentacosta must now convince a federal judge to hear what he says are 6 new witnesses who will testify that Antonio James wasn't the shooter.
You believe Antonio James is innocent of these crimes?
Absolutely.
But taken in the best light from your client's point of view, he's at least guilty of murder in the second degree, which is life in prison without the possibility of parole. So we're not really talking about innocence in the way that people think about innocence.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. We're talking about innocent of killing someone. Innocent of pulling a trigger and killing someone. Mr. James is that.
So, Warden, this is where Antonio James will take his final steps down this corridor here.
As the clock hits midnight, these 6 men will be prepared to carry Antonio James to the death chamber if he falters or resists. No one ever has.
When you turn the curve and see the table, it's a shock. The room is like it is. It's white. It looks, it looks sterile. Which, it looks alive, but yet it reeks of death. Okay, Antonio, you can make your last statement now.
At the same time, Trentacosta is heading to court, where the judge must decide whether or not he's willing to hear those witnesses, which would halt the execution.
All we're asking for, Judge, if you're not so sure that we win the case, just give us 10 hours to put our proof on. Because if he doesn't give us those 10 hours, this man's dead and the case is closed forever.
Prosecutor Jack Peebles will be in court to oppose Trentacosta. He'll argue that most of those new witnesses are still in jail and not worth listening to.
Previously, his efforts of this type have been denied in the federal courts. We are going to ask the judge to deny this one also.
They're just going to lift him up and set him here. They'll lay him down, and each person on the strap-down team has a specific strap even.
Are there any things that the fellas who've been on the team longer tell the people who first come on it?
I think the only thing that the old hands told me was not to look in his face. I guess it becomes more personal when you look in his face.
People say that lethal injection is really a very easy way for these men to die. Is that true?
It's not how you die, though. I don't think. It's the walk in the door. It's the sit on the table. It's the straps around your arm, because it takes you longer to strap you in here than it does in an electric chair. So, is it the pain of death? I don't think it is. I think it's the anticipation of death
Back in New Orleans, court is in recess, and Nick Trent Acosta is hopeful.
Well, we had 2 hours of oral argument to the judge, and I think he's deeply troubled by the evidence we present to him, and he, as he announced from the bench, he needs to think about it for the next couple of hours before making his decision on whether to stop the execution. I think the argument went well, and he's going to let us know at 2 o'clock.
Together, Nick Trent Acosta and Antonio James have been fighting off death for 8 years. Trent Acosta now represents 22 men on death row at Angola, and Antonio James was the first.
I have confidence in you. And before you leave, I want you to tell you that I miss you and I love you.
Well, Tony, I love you too, man.
I appreciate that.
As we stand in this room, a room that's filled with so much mystery and
Death, a lot of death in this one. Electric chair used to sit right here. And that was the ventilator fan to take out the stench.
But now, death will come through the IV lines that will be inserted into Antonio James's arms after he is strapped to the table.
Okay, how you feel? Oh, that's good. Everything's fine.
At this point, the only thing that could stop the real execution is a last-minute call.
These 2 phones,
yeah,
to the Department of Corrections, one is to the governor's mansion.
right.
There's a code word. And if this phone rings and they don't do the code word, I ignore the call.
And if that phone doesn't ring, the executioner, in a small room behind one-way glass, takes his cue from the warden.
And I'll give a signal to them in there, and then they'll know then to go ahead and they manually do the injection into the IV line of the drug that's going to cause the death.
The theory is that it's the worst of the worst who are executed.
No. There's meaner people in this prison than the people on death row. And that's what's sad. Because sometimes even ourselves, as warden, would shudder. We let this guy go from prison, and we'd say, man, that's crazy to let that one go. But yet we keep this one over here that we think and feel like is totally rehabilitated. But then we don't second guess the system. We should.
Tony, we got bad news.
The judge has made a decision.
We got bad news, Tony.
Okay.
He ruled against us without letting us have a hearing.
Okay.
That means their new witnesses will not be heard. But Trent Acosta and his co-counsel Denny LaBeouf don't have time for a post-mortem. They are already moving on to the next battle.
So I'm leaving in a few minutes, Tony, and I should see you this evening. Apparently they're going to let me chat with you about the pardon board tomorrow, so I'll be there not too long.
The judge made the decision that we expected and that we asked for. Pardon board hearing is set for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at Angola. That'll be the next step.
For the defense team, it will be a long night, like so many others before. On a case that's been heard 26 different times in 5 courts, Trent Acosta has all but run out of legal options. Most of his hope now rests with tomorrow's pardon board, which can recommend to the governor that James's life be spared.
Just ahead on Eyewitness News, this convicted killer makes one last attempt to save his own life.
The pardon board met today at Angola, where James is scheduled to die by lethal injection early Friday morning.
Today, attorneys who defended James and those who prosecuted him spoke before the pardon board. So did relatives of the victim.
Last April, pardon board members rejected James's plea by a vote of 3-2.
Antonio James is remarkably calm for a man facing death.
We are here today to hear the application of Mr. James in reference to the state's decree that he be executed before this weekend.
We believe this is a changed man.
Ladies and gentlemen, this man was convicted by a jury fairly.
The worst thing that could happen would be the execution of a man who's innocent of the crime for which he's being executed.
His guilt or innocence is something for the jury to decide, not for you to decide.
Mr. Antonio James has appealed and appealed and appealed for 16 years. My uncle begged for his life. One night, one appeal. He didn't get it. Mr. James has changed. Isn't that great? We're glad that he changed. My uncle has not changed. He's still rotting in his grave. He's been there for 17 years.
And for 17 years, Elvin Adams Jr. has also waited for Antonio James to pay for his crime. Oddly enough, the defense hopes that today Mr. Adams might actually help their client. It's a long shot, but they are desperate.
I also want to tell this board briefly that I've participated in a very remarkable meeting last Friday between Tony James and Mr. Alvin Adams.
Mr. James, how you doing? You could be better, Mr. James. How you been doing?
I'm doing okay.
That's good. That's good.
I want you to understand how truly sorry I am for your father's death.
Mr. James, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
James's lawyers are hoping that after spending some time together, Adams will tell the pardon board that Antonio James is a changed man who doesn't deserve to die.
My father was Alvin Adams. I was up here last Friday and Antonio James and I talked. Mr. James told me that he was not the trigger man in my father's murder. I asked Mr. James, what did you do?
I just stood there.
By you being there, you are just as much guilty as the one that pulled the trigger, even though you may not have pulled the trigger. You see?
But if I'm innocent or not, it doesn't matter. Do it matter to you?
Daddy, do it matter to you? He didn't answer.
One meeting could not erase 17 years of pain and anger.
It's time for Mr. James to answer. The only sorry I feel is for Mr. James' family, because I love my father and I know his family love him, but enough is enough.
In the end, the pardon board agrees.
We find no compelling reason at this time to change the sentence that was pronounced upon you by your fellow Americans. With that, we will conclude this hearing. Thank you.
By a vote of 3-2, the State Pardon Board today rejected convicted killer Antonio James' plea to spare his life.
Family members of the victim are clearly pleased with the pardon board's decision. The family members for the condemned man wept openly after the decision was read.
James argued for his life, perhaps for the last time. This afternoon, the State Pardon Board refused James's request for a stay of execution, but the courts and the governor still have a say in the matter. James was found guilty of robbing and killing a man in the French Quarter back in 1979.
Remember, it only takes one phone call from the governor or from the state. But will it happen? Will that chance ever happen? When we come back, we're going to hear more from Antonio James, the warden, and possibly more from the attorneys. And you'll even get to see that last meal prepared. Don't go away. Returning to our story, it only takes one phone call from the governor or from the corrections court to stop the execution. But isn't going to happen? You're going to hear more from Antonio James and hear more from the prison and hear more from the warden. As the countdown to midnight begins, you also meet the family and you'll get a chance to see the last meal prepared. Again, Cynthia McFadden.
Two o'clock. Antonio James has 10 hours to live as his family arrives for a final visit. Their bus ride to the death house is somber.
Well, you forgot about your boy, Michael Perry.
While he waits for his family, Antonio James has asked for Sergeant Henry to wait with him. The guard and the prisoner arrived on death row at nearly the same time. And now, to pass the hours, they reminisce about the inmates they have known.
Okay, we forgot Sonia's brother. We didn't mention him, yeah.
For the family, this day is about faith and denial. James's mother made this same trip to the death house last year, so she continues to believe this is not the last time she will see her son. James's son, 19-year-old Antonio Jr., has spent this week making up for lost time. He's seen his father 4 times these last 6 days, twice as much as in the entire 12 years before. Tony Jr. brings his son, yet another Antonio, to see the grandfather he had never met until this week.
I was wondering how you feel about seeing your family today. There were bound to be tears.
Yeah.
Do the tears make it harder for you?
Well, it hurts me because I know what they're going through.
Of his 6 siblings, James is especially close to his sister Lupita.
I can't breathe. I can deal with me. I can deal with whatever I have to go through. It's that when you look at someone else and you recognize the impact that it's going to take on them.
You don't see every breed? You don't see every breed?
The goal today is to keep things upbeat, provide distraction, anything to help the condemned man maintain his composure.
You're all right.
James himself reminds one of the young nephews how to play his part.
I want you to know, man, I love you, man. I know that. Don't go to acting crazy. That's the worst thing you can do now.
No,
If you really act crazy, I'm going to put you out.
I'm not going crazy, man.
5:30.
Throughout the visit, James pays closest attention to his mother and the minutes ticking away, until Antonio Jr. takes the watch right off his father's wrist, a keepsake promised to him, something he could pass on to his own son. The watch is the only possession Antonio James has to give. Next door, dinner preparations get underway. The last meal will be served in the visiting room once the family has been cleared out at 6 o'clock. The hour approaches. There is now only time for a few last memories.
I just don't want to see him get in no kind of trouble out there. That's all. I want to see him take care of himself and be strong out there and hang on.
In the end, it is Antonio James who comforts his family.
Come on. You just gotta hang in there, man. It's gonna be all right.
My dad crying.
I'm tired, pick up. Okay.
He got himself his gun.
Okay. All right. I got to sit over here. All right. Right. Take care.
Six o'clock. At the front gate, one of the witnesses has arrived hours ahead of time.
Will this close a chapter on your life?
It'll close the chapter as far as Mr. James is concerned, but it'll never stop the hurt and the sorrow.
A few moments later, James's family leaves by the front gate, and it also attracts the attention of the press.
And let's go now to Angola. News 8's Charles Molyneux is there. Charles?
Well, John Margaret, James spent the day with his family. His family has now left. He will spend the rest of this evening having his last meal.
I am in Angola, where it appears the execution of condemned killer Antonio James will go on as scheduled.
Even now, James's attorneys are furiously working the U.S. Supreme Court, trying to get a stay. But they admit that's a long shot, and they fully expect their client to be executed sometime after midnight tonight.
Well, he has fewer than 6 hours to live. 41-year-old convicted killer Antonio James' life is now in the hands of the United States Supreme Court.
He has ordered a seafood platter for his last meal. He will spend the rest of the evening with his spiritual advisor and attorneys. They have until 3 o'clock by law to do it, 3 o'clock in the morning. But they usually get started at 12:01, George.
Okay, thanks very much. James Rose reporting live from Angola prison, where a man will be put to death in about 6 hours.
He can sit here,
What will you do when it's over?
take a deep breath, and we'll go back through it another dozen times and want to do it right. You know, just wonder what God thinks.
Will you pray that day, that
I
night?
try to pray every day, yeah. We're going to pray when we have supper that night. Well, let's bow our heads and we'll say grace. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this meal. We just thank you for this food. We just pray.
All these are almost instantaneous. Before the syringes are empty, they've taken effect. The first syringe is sodium pentothal. That's going to put him to sleep.
Comfort the victims, and you'll comfort Tony as he takes his walk tonight, if it's so be.
Second one is pancuronium bromide. it's going to stop him from breathing.
We just pray that you'll bless each and every one of us and be with us through this day.
And the KCL is a cardiac drug, and that will stop his heart.
Bless his food. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay. You first.
If Antonio asked you to hold his hand, would you?
The victims are going to say, I wish someone had held my daughter's hand while somebody was killing her. And I'm going to say, if I had been there with your daughter and I was in a position where I could have done that, I would have held your daughter's hand if I could have. And I wouldn't even have let it happen if I could have. But since I couldn't be there, it doesn't mean I shouldn't do what I should do while I'm here with him. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
The answer then has to be, yes, I'd hold his hand.
Well, Mr. Henry, you can't never say I ain't never took you out to dinner.
What about that, Henry? Man got a sense of humor.
James works to keep the mood light. It is perhaps the only thing left he can control.
Yeah, no. I don't want them to think that it's going to be any kind of problem or something like that, you know. So I just was trying to make the situation for him as comfortable as for myself.
You're trying to make the warden comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I'll see y'all later then.
All right, Larry.
Okay. Now y'all do not cry. And make this man have to console y'all like he did last time.
We promise.
That's what me and him said I was gonna tell y'all. I did good, Tony. Didn't know that. Yeah. Okay. All right. It's not something I look forward to do. And I don't know that it's right or wrong. I know that right now this is the law of the land. This is what we do, and this is what we gotta do.
Have you asked Antonio James to forgive you for what your role in this is?
See, that's the part I don't vacillate on. I don't need any forgiveness for my role in what I'm doing. If I needed forgiveness, then I'd be committing sins and I'd be doing wrong. I'm not doing wrong.
Until the end, Antonio James continues to maintain he never shot either victim.
We've talked a lot about what you're innocent of, and I want to ask you, what are you guilty of?
Armed robbery.
Armed robbery. When you talk to God about your sins,
I ask for forgiveness.
that doesn't include their deaths.
It includes their death for being present. I don't want to try to find it.
There are going to be people watching this who say Antonio James is just a great con artist. That he's just conning all of us.
That's okay. That's fine. Because it doesn't matter if he is or not. It matters how we ourselves deal with this. And how it moves me and how it moves others. And that's what really counts. I don't think he is, but if he is, it's still okay.
Back at his ranch office, Warden Kane joins his staff for their dinner.
You think he's going to get a steak? Think it's sayonara, huh? Bob, you pass the ketchup. You help yourself first.
Last year by this time, the warden had already gotten the call that stopped the execution. Tonight, no word.
We're just kind of on standby and watching the clock, and he's doing fine. He's with his two religious advisors.
This is from the Supreme Court.
This application to stay executed.
When did you receive this one?
About 5 minutes ago, Tim.
So that means
That means it's denied. That means the execution will probably take place. That's all.
The James family will not be permitted inside the prison for the execution, so they gather for a prayer vigil at the front gate.
You still want to think a little bit about the victim too? But we can't deal with the victim now. You've got to figure out how to deal with this. So it's proceed. We watch the clock. What you have, 10:38. As a lawyer says, we have a horrible job, horrible way to make a living. I think we do.
For some, the warden's job is a sad but necessary one.
I wish we didn't have to be here tonight. I wish nobody had been murdered.
For 16 years, since this couple's daughter was brutally murdered, they have held their own vigil, supporting every execution. For Antonio Jr., This is too much.
That's my fault. How you think I feel? How you think I feel? He's about to be killed for something he hasn't done.
Will we stop having victims?
Stop having victims?
That's right. Stop having somebody else decided to take somebody else's life.
How do you think? How you know he took his life? You don't even know the person. What's his name?
Antonio G. James.
And what happens now?
Well, till about 11:15, we keep waiting, and we'll prepare him to go ahead and go to the death chamber. If we get no calls, if nothing happened, it's still kind of a fluid thing. It could go either way.
When we come back to the conclusion of the story, and please God, let this be a good conclusion to the story. Stay with us. Sorry for the little humor that had. Sorry for the little humor prayer before we went on break. Please God, let this be a good conclusion to the story. And speaking of that, now the conclusion to our story. Antonio James, now the conclusion to our story. In about 30 minutes, the warden will signal off the go-ahead to execute Antonio James. Remember, he was sentenced to life for one murder, and now he was sentenced to death. He was held off death row for over 10 years. Now the day has finally come for him to be executed. The question is, will the phone call be followed through, or will they not be a phone call? Remember, the Supreme Court letter said that it was denied. But will the Corrections Court call? Here is the conclusion to our story. Cynthia McFadden.
It is just a few minutes before midnight. Now, only a phone call from the governor can save Antonio James's life.
Roll the boot cuff up in your pants. Pull your sweatshirt off.
I told the warden tonight that I hated to hear this talk from him, that I'm just doing a job. We've heard that before from people, and we know that sometimes you just have to stand up and you say, this job of killing people is not what I should be involved in. And I told the warden, I said, I hate to hear you say that, but I would never counsel you against being here because you are important to my clients, and he is. There have been other wardens that have not treated my clients with the kind of dignity and respect that he does.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread.
At midnight, Warden Kane leads Antonio James to the death chamber.
For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, now and forever.
He was my friend, and I would miss him.
at 7 a.m. this morning. Thank you.
I can't feel him. I can't touch him. Clown with us.
It wasn't no fun watching the man die. And it's no fun burying someone that you love, that someone like Mr. James have killed. Mr. James decided to take lives. So Mr. James had to surrender his life.
Tell us what happened tonight.
Well, he was laying there and he kind of grabbed my hand, so I held his hand, and then I told him he's waiting for us, get ready, going for the ride. And I said, I ain't over here. He kind of smiled, he said, bless you. That's the last word he said. And then I had nodded my head to go ahead. He was holding my hand real tight. And then after a couple of minutes, he took about 3 or 4 deep breaths, and then he relaxed my hand. I do believe right now his soul is in heaven and he's okay. And since I believe that, then that makes it easier.
And tomorrow?
It's like the dog barks and the caravan keeps moving across the endless desert. So is life.
And Antonio James's cell on death row will be filled by someone else?
Quickly.
There are currently more than 3,000.
Quickly.
And quickly it will be. What a great story. A great storyline and execution. And if you remember early this season, we focused on the last smile. One man who knew the same thing is about to die. When we come back, we're going to do a comparison between those two. We can really do a comparison between those two. Stay with us, and we'll tell you. Welcome back. Let's do compare and contrast for just 1 minute. This is Antonio James. This is Patrick Rogers. If you didn't remember earlier this season, we did the story about Patrick Rogers, who the state has been trying for years to get him on death row, but they failed, and because of one jury. Patrick Rogers was sentenced to death years ago because of a shooting that happened. To really compare and contrast Antonio James and Patrick Rogers, you have to go back to those years. Remember, as they talked about from Antonio James, he did not shoot. But Patrick Rogers said in this case, in the Texas case, he did shoot. So, really, between Antonio James and what happened, and this guy. Here's a portion of how it happened with the murder.
I'm John Larson.
Death Row, Huntsville, Texas, March 1997. Patrick Rogers' execution could be scheduled any day. Many here insist they're innocent. Rogers never has.
Did you kill Officer David Roberts?
I did.
You pulled the trigger?
I pulled the trigger.
Not once, but 6 times.
6 times.
He killed an officer. That's Patrick Rogers who killed an officer. Antonio James killed a family member. But for Antonio James, you have to remember, he was the victim. He says he did not shoot. But the witnesses say that Antonio James pulled the trigger. So whether you believe Antonio James did pull the trigger or did not pull the trigger, I don't know what to believe. I mean, let me tell you, in this Antonio James case, if those six witnesses came crashing through the courtroom and saying, "Hey, this is not fair. I want to tell y'all what happened." Even the prosecution would have to play tackle football for it to happen, to reach that goal line. This is what it would be like. I want to tell the judge what happened. Ooh, he goes left. Ooh, he goes right. He goes to the 20. He goes to the 20. He goes to the 50. Touchdown! but they would get to the kick part. And this time, the prosecution would be the block. He's gonna kick, the kick is up, it's good! You get the picture here? It's like tackle football, but different. Hold on, I got a perfect scenario here. I got a perfect scenario for the 6 witnesses in the case. X would probably be the prosecution. The O is the witnesses. What stands between X would be the freedom of Antonio James. The O would be death penalty. So, who would stand in the way? What stands between them and the goal line? The death penalty. That's right, the death penalty. So, you have to find a way around. Those 6 witnesses we're talking about could testify. And if it was true that Antonio James did not kill the father, and one of those witnesses said that person did, that person would come forward and say, yes, I was the one that killed this person. If he had confessed, then the execution would stop, the witness would take Antonio James' place, and he might still be alive today. Only if, and only if, that had happened. If that had happened, Antonio James would tell his side about what had happened. So that's the X and the O between the goal line. If. If they start to play a little tackle football. In this case, Roman Pollock would win. Now that we focus on Antonio James, Patrick Rogers. Patrick Rogers was the kind of guy you would probably not want to talk to. If you heard the headlines from years ago, he shot an officer, not once, 6 times. Listen to what he had to say.
They're innocent. Rogers never has.
Did you kill Officer David Roberts?
I did.
You pulled the trigger?
I pulled the trigger.
Not once, but 6 times.
6 times.
Though he admits what he did, Rogers says he is not the killer who came to death row in 1986. Something happened to him here in segregation, the worst part of death row, which Rogers calls the lower level of hell. Over the years, Rogers says he sobered up, and without drugs, he found religion, Islam. He began writing, first poetry, then a children's story about the dangers of drug use. And perhaps most importantly, he began asking himself tough questions. Why had he killed a man? And what had happened to his boyhood dreams?
Wonder how many of your neighbors are still here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
According...
I guess you get the picture here for these two. So, capital punishment would be unconstitutional, but then the state reversed itself. So, you really can't sympathize between 38 states. I mean, Texas is the only state that would really close the chapter on the death penalty. All right. Going back to my favorite Bible break from Law by Mike. It was kind of funny to watch this one. Things you think are illegal that are actually totally legal. You bet this was illegal? But it's totally legal.
Are illegal that are actually totally legal. Number 1.
They're highly illegal to sell or own in some states,
But 29 states say they're legal.
Wait, battery is still a crime. This is illegal.
Yeah, I'm a criminal.
Number 2, owning a tank and driving it on public roads.
There are rules, though, like leaving the cannons disabled and registered and signals that comply with state requirements, following all weight restrictions, abiding by speed limits, and not damaging public property, among other things. But if you do all that, then you're good to go. And seek revenge.
This is assault. You're a lawyer. You can't break the law.
You're right. What was I thinking? Truce?
Number 3, some states allow you to carry switchblades.
You stabbed me. Stabbing me when it's not self-defense is still illegal, though.
Mike, I'm a criminal.
Things you think are illegal there, actually.
So now you get it. Brass knuckles are illegal to sell on in some states. 29 states say they're legal. But battery's still a crime. Tanks, though. You got pulled over by a tank with a gun. I'm gonna give revenge to the person who stabbed me. Boom, boom, boom. And switchblades. Oh my God. It wasn't so good, man. I'm a criminal, man. That's it for Throwback Thursday. Coming up on Give Me Break Friday, the story of Philip Leonetti. A killer. His name is Philip Leonetti, and for the very first time, you are going to hear his side of the tale about him and the mob. That's on Friday. That's tomorrow. That's Friday. Then on Monday, it's Sammy. Then on Monday, it's Sammy the Bull, the man who brought down John Gotti. And also on Give Me Break Saturday, you are going to meet a man who took on the mob with hidden cameras. And the worst question, if one person had caught him whatever in the wire, what would have happened? You will meet him in a Dayline exclusive as he takes on the mob. That's on Saturday. That's all for Throwback Thursday. We'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll see you again next week for Throwback Thursday. And we'll see you for Give Me a Break Friday. For all of us here at YouTube and Give Me a Break, stop bullying, speak up. Concentration, not strength. No jaywalking. No drinking and driving. No texting and driving. No distracted driving. No road rage. Stay in your own lane. Have a good night.